like to thank Kim, who's joining us quite late at night. Uh,
Yeah.
Thank you, Kim, for such a powerful film. It's incredible and very very moving, but also raises some very interesting questions for people outside of the US. It's quite unfamiliar, this sense of a gun culture which can then permeate into schools. Can you give us a bit of a background into what has led to this very strong gun culture and why it's been allowed to affect children so devastatingly?
Wow. Well, I don't know if I can still grasp in any way why exactly our gun culture came to be what it is today. It's perplexing to me, even as an American. But I can tell you that sitting in these times now, since we made the film, with all that's going on, the gun issue for me as a human being, as an American, as a filmmaker, has become just even more paramount. We've got, COVID going on, and we've got arms sales escalating at a time when people are out of work, they're depressed, and two-thirds of our shameful 40,000 deaths a year by guns are suicides. So, it's just uh, on top of everything else, I really fear that right now is a time where if you didn't care about it before, between suicide, rises in domestic violence, what we all saw happen, what's happening with Black Lives Matters and Black and Brown communities, suffering from gun violence every day. It's just dire. But I don't know that I answered the question of how it came to be. I still am in shock in watching. I'm in shock in watching in our country people with AR-15s who, with their freedom of expression right or their Second Amendment rights, can carry those guns because they don't want to wear masks to protect us from dying from a deadly virus. And yet you have thousands and hundreds of thousands of people peacefully protesting who wouldn't dare come with their, even if they legally have an AR-15. So it's crazy.
One of the most recent affecting and disturbing images that I've seen with regards to American gun culture and the Black Lives Matter movement with the two wealthy middle-aged white people. One had a semi-automatic, it looked like, one like an AR-15, and the woman had a pistol, and they had them pointed at people because there seemed to be a real climate of fear that they were going to have their private property or their rights infringed or something. Like, do you think that there's a way back from the point that the US is at the moment with its attitude towards gun culture and its love for guns? I mean, the you mentioned the Second Amendment is that it's the right to bear arms, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Do you think that that has entrenched itself as the founding fathers envisioned, or that has taken some wild mutant tangent that's really negatively affecting American society?
I think some of the ugly truth has come out that I always have dumped to understand it because I didn't grow up around gun culture, so I don't understand it more than a lot of people looking in on our country do. But I've come to understand um, better why certain people feel they want and need guns. There are people who hunt. There are people who do it for sport. I think what's scary in the context of today is how many people have guns because they fear a time when they will have to have some kind of uprising, and that's really scary given what's happening in our streets. And so I don't. On the other hand, the film uh, is the one thing that gave me hope. Making it, being around youth who are you know, I do have hope in that, because I think, you know, there's that funny moment at the end where Emma says, you know, someone says, "Can you sustain this journalist?" And she says, "Oh yeah, we're going to live a lot longer. You know, we have a lot of time." And it's kind of true of a lot of things, right? So even with more conservative youth in America, I see more of a dialogue around it. Um, so I'm somewhat hopeful. It's hard to have hope about a lot of things, but I think that's the point of the movie. Is it's a coming of age story, about an age that we all, you know, for people who are that age, and I hope there are some people closer to that age who watch it. I know a lot have here. For those of us who are older, for me, it just puts me in touch with that person, that I was at 17, and remembering, that hope is inherent in that age, even though they're living in the most nihilistic generational time I can imagine. So I just look at them and my heart goes out, because I do think it's a story of courage.
I was just going to say, like the the courage literally under fire, and the courage also to speak out, and the courage um, to remain coherent and articulate under such emotionally disturbing times, especially for young people. Like um, how do we support young people who and it seems like their youth is almost being taken from them. Uh, they've become more adult than the adults, and there's this unfortunate feeling that they've had to grow up so quickly to deal with these issues because adults aren't. How do you think that we can support young people to uh, articulate these issues to power, but also help them recapture some of that lost youth?
Yeah, I'm thinking about that a lot these days. And well, first of all, more specifically, we're working with the film, which will be released, sometime, in the month before our general election. We're working with the youth movement to utilize the film to try to turn the youth vote out. So you can, you know, follow what we're doing with that campaign through, Us Kids, our website. I think it's uskidsfilm.com. And and also, you know, we're working very, hand in hand with March for Our Lives, the organization. They're doing some amazing things with a program called Our Power right now. They're doing a virtual, well, nobody knows what's virtual and what's not going to be virtual come September and October, but, either way, some kind of a tour, of 9 strategic states. So you can follow those activities. But I've been thinking a lot about, um, you know, obviously thinking a lot about Black Lives Matters, and, just such an important moment in the country. But these conversations and these dialogues that we're talking about, but thinking about how they need to happen in terms of age and intergenerationally, and how it's really just about respect. You know, how I felt in making this film, that it was really important to see, for them to understand that I saw them as human beings that were younger than me, but, you know, just chronologically, I've been here longer, but they've been here and grown up in a time that's different than when I did. So they have knowledge I don't have. And that sharing of experience versus, things that, you know, not just things they've experienced, but I think the way that their brains are wired differently, because of growing up on the internet, is, there's just I think that's one way, is to stand with them. I think when Emma in the movie says, you know, these people come up and say, "Oh, you're so brave," and there was so much almost fetishizing, and like, "You go," and like, you, and they're like, you know, we need all of us. It's not about, you know, go kids go and save the world.
Yeah.
We need to get off our asses and really, take their lead. And it's not the first time. I mean, obviously, so many great movements have been born out of that age group. They just, there's more energy. There's nothing to lose. you're not jaded in the same way.
Mm.
So that's really, I think, what the film is also trying to get at.
And I think you made a good point just then, but also through the movie, is that there's a new environment of the internet as well. They have social media, they're wielding social media like some kind of magic and reaching more people than ever before in a very immediate way. Do you think that social media will actually enact some change or be the conduit to some change that previously hasn't existed, and that we might actually see some positive movement to reform of these gun laws?
I do have a lot of hope. I mean, that was part of what, that was, maybe it's the timeline isn't as apparent, but it really was 3 weeks that they got together the wherewithal to get, the largest youth movement since the Vietnam War to assemble in Washington, as well as sister marches all over the globe. 3 weeks through social media. I mean, we know what happened with Arab Spring. That was instigated through a social media phenomenon. So we do know what can happen, and that's the line in the movie where Cameron said it was like the world was a video game. We had the codes, and I think that's part of the fascinating thing I watched is they were just kids who, in the beginning, were just focused. They were just in trauma and angry and lost their friends and wanted to do something about it, didn't want to get famous, didn't ask for any of that, and just sort of went forward. And then the media, it's not even to criticize them, the traditional media kind of seized on them, and they suddenly were like, wait a minute. I mean, I think a lot of that generation and beyond is just very cynical of the way our media works. And so it started to go that way where, of course, they wanted the microphone. And then they said, wait a minute, now our narrative isn't ours exactly. We want to take it back. And so, their ability to sort of say, we actually don't need you anymore so much. We can do this. We have the superpower.
Yeah.
So that's what I love and I do think that, unfortunately, our president has also understood the power of Twitter. But it's hopefully it can be used. They can use it to do great things in these coming months that are so critical.
Yeah, and like you say, with the mainstream media, the old media is getting in the Shark Tank, and you start to feel the nibbles on the toes. You want to get out as soon as you can. And I mean, one aspect of the movie which really struck home to me, I've been involved in some social justice movements before, and it's very easy to feel burnt out. It's very easy to feel like you're not achieving anything, and especially for young people who haven't had that hardened, haven't suffered a defeat and come back again to rise again successfully. They were right in the middle of the Shark Tank, right in the frying pan and in the fire, and they had to adjust really quickly, and the self-care element really came through. Has there been any follow-up on how they're doing now, like being so brave and putting themselves out there, to then the sudden shock of being out of the limelight and having to cope with the repercussions of what they tried to do?
They're fired up again. I
Good.
think the gravity of our situation, I think it did take them a minute to say, wait a second, we are kids that need lives, that need higher educations. Some of us want to choose to do that. But Emma really wanted to be regular, so to speak. Fame was something that was weird actually for her, as you could see in the movie. And so now they're fired up, and Black Lives Matter, they always understood that intersectionality. Hopefully that comes across. We're working closely with Bria, who had done so much in her hometown of Milwaukee. She's just about to lead like a 40-mile march with, so they're all doing things together and separately. And I think they're gearing up, that, they've sort of restored themselves and understand that this is a a moment in history. David has never wavered for a second. He's just like keeps going. So yeah, I think if you follow them, they're in the game.
Well, good. As long as they're supported and they feel they're supported. We have a excuse me. We have a question from the audience. This isn't the first film you've made about school shootings. Have you seen any significant developments in the stories or the responses since Newton and Notes from Dunblane?
Yeah, great question, and thanks for whoever is tracking the trajectory of my filmmaking in these past years. I didn't intend to sort of have such a large amount of time dedicated to, and they're not school shootings per se, but I think it's the terrain of trauma and the travesty of, yes, the gun issue too. But psychologically, there's so much in it that to unpack. And I think one of the things people say, nothing happened after Newtown. If the death of 20 first graders didn't change something, I mean, you guys changed stuff in the week. I remember, just as a tangent, being with our kids in Washington doing this. There's a shots of it in the movie. They do this art installation. It's a year anniversary, and it was, I think, the week after your tragic shooting. And we were just like, it's that easy. You can just, I mean, what strength, what courage your prime minister had to just said, this is what we're doing. And anyhow, I think the promising thing since Newtown is that the messengers have gotten more varied and stronger. So after Newtown, we saw a lot more doctors. We worked with a lot of emergency workers saying, 10 years ago, we couldn't talk about this as doctors. But we're on the front lines. This is a public health crisis. We see like an average of 9 kids a day dying. You saw doctors, you saw teachers stepping up. You saw clergy in the case of the short we did, Notes from Dunblane. And you saw, and now more and more law enforcement. You see a lot of sheriffs speaking out and saying, we don't want this either. We don't want this arms race. And then of course the youth was like waiting. I was sort of waiting for that moment and all of, and that was really interesting because a lot of the kids who survived Newtown, who had significant PTSD, were first graders, third graders. I'm close with Natalie Barden, who lost her little brother when she was in third grade. And she's become a very powerful voice, and now is about to enter college. But I think there was this my own desire to sort of follow us kids was because I also saw a nation of traumatized kids, and and people not really looking at the cost of that to our society. You've got all these kids that are scared and mad, and no one's protecting us. And I always had this image when I was making the film of, I don't know, I had this image of like teenagers in a house with parents that are fighting and divorcing, and they're also alcoholics, and they're just sort of sick of it. And then one day they're in the back seat, they're not old enough to drive maybe, but they realize the parents are drunk and they're going to kill them. And they're just like, I have to take the wheel. Like I have to do this now. And it felt like that. It felt like this sort of just looking around, like, what are people not understanding about this? So that's sort of how I channeled it, that rage and that incredulity that we just have, and I feel that way right now about what we're doing in response to the virus. It's just look at your infection rate. Like, what is it? Like 0.
We're managing the cases coming back in of returning New Zealanders, but yeah, it's all monitored at the border and so on. Yeah, I mean
I keep thinking there's a total parallel between the same, what could you not understand about this? and it comes down to a selfishness. It comes down to some kind of, getting back to your original question, some kind of, warped, bastardized image of version of a value that at one time was an interesting American value of individualism and new frontier, and it was a young country, and somehow that's translated in these times and with these challenges into just utter selfishness of not understanding that we are one, and this virus is so it couldn't be clearer. And I think the gun issue has a similarity, because when I made Newtown, one of the fathers I was close to, who's in the movie, got up and testified and just said, your right to own an assault style weapon, does not trump the right of my son to his life. Mm. And it's the same thing. Your right to say, I don't want to wear a mask, does not trump the idea of community spread. It's almost the same thing. Like, I want to have the right to do this. You can't tell me, big brother. You can't tell me not to. And yet 40,000 lives are lost. So it's just, it's a maddening thing. And, I think secretly there's a whole bunch of us who are really trying to figure out how to get there, how to get down to where you are. And you're right not to open your borders, but we want the secret passage.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd love to open the borders to people who are sympathetic to the way that we do things, but it's for the moment we can only extend our hope that things will settle down for everyone in America soon.
Thank you.
What are your thoughts on the pathways to that? Not only with regards to COVID, not only with regards to Black Lives Matter, but this particular issue here with the young people having to march for their lives.
Our hope. We have a president that is fully embracing. The NRA, gun culture, white supremacists. It's like, the hope is that needs to go away in November. I don't really know what more to say, except that we've never lived through anything like this. And for young people, I think that translates into, it's so dire that we need to turn out that youth vote, because in the midterms, as you saw in the film, they really made a difference. I mean, they are truly responsible for changing the face of at least our House of Representatives. So, even if it's down ballot, there's a lot of local races that are just essential. I mean, it can also translate in all kinds of other ways in local communities, especially now in our country where there's a void, where the central government isn't taking charge of these issues, really. So it's coming down, that's, I think, in some ways a hopeful thing, that you've never seen governors and mayors in our country have more visibility. And for people to understand, like, my life actually is in the hand of this woman or man making this policy around, what we're doing with the virus, what guns can be here. I mean, there are national laws that are protected, but so much is happening that is almost like federalism, that we're just so utterly different in diversity. So I think it's about getting people to vote down ballot and think about locally what's happening in their community and how they can make a difference. Civic engagement. And the other encouraging thing is I'm looking at the poster, the image from our film. There's this little kid, Langston, with the blonde hair, from Sioux City, Iowa. I love Langston. And Langston's like, 10, and he's out there, I can't vote yet, but I speak on behalf of, candidates that support this and, gun reform and this and that. So I feel like there's a whole generation that is so inspired, and these kids are role models to them. They're not just looking to get up and get on a TV show and sing now. They really want to be a generation that turned something around. So that encourages me a lot.
Yeah, planting seeds, you grow a field.
That's right. That's right.
We have another question from the audience. How does making these powerful films on difficult subjects affect you personally?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah, I have to admit, after 6 years of being in this terrain, it's definitely taken its toll. Um, you get burnout, you get some secondary trauma, um, takes its toll on personal relationships, either not enough time for them or just not being everything you want to be in that personal part of life. So I think right now with the quarantine, I have been taking a tiny pause just to kind of regroup, and take the lead from the kids too, because they also really were very big on, you got to, self-care. So it's like everything else, it's about balance, but it is hard. I think that, I think I need to balance. I think what's great about this film, Us Kids, is there's, Newtown was this gut punch. It was like this, it was a treatise on grief. But this is, there's feistiness. There's, rage and anger is something that is putting me back in touch, as I said, with my teenage self. And there's a lot of that is, a different kind of a feeling, that is, and I'm close with a lot of these kids. I mean, I really consider them friends. Hopefully they look to me to be a bit of a friend and a mentor at times. But, when I feel down, there's nobody who makes me feel better than picking up the phone and talking to one of them. It really does just lift me up. And because the conversations are so inspiring and, not defeatist. And I think, as I said, that's just sort of the nature of that age. So, some adults don't love that age, but I do.
Well, speaking of inspiration, you've inspired a whole new audience here in New Zealand, and even though we don't necessarily have the same kind of problems here, we're more aware of the problems there, so we will give support wherever we can. And our best hopes for more widespread distribution, and how you manage to affect a whole new audience and a whole new generation for really continuing to affect change in the world. So Kim, thank you very much for joining us.